Yes, hello everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the meeting with ECRF, a conversation about human rights. Nice to see you here on online. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, we weren't able to meet physically, but thanks for Bergen Global for facilitating this event in the best possible way digitally on a Saturday. I'm Osama Shaheen from DAR. DAR is a journal for Arabic speakers in Norway, and we are very thrilled to have our first event and very pleasure to have great human rights defenders as our first guests. Here with me in the studio, we have Jostein Kobbeltvedt, Executive Director for Rafto Foundation. Thank you for coming, Jostein.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. And from Egypt, we have Mohamed Lotfi, Executive Director for the Human Rights, the Egyptian Commission for Rights and Freedoms, ECRF. Thank you for joining us, Mohamed.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah. And I will start the conversation actually by reading these two paragraphs. It's an article from I found on the Internationalist. It's after the Egyptian Commission won the prize in 2018. It's Index Censorship Prize. And the article says, it started with a game of backgammon. Ahmed, Abdallah, and Mohamed Lotfi sat playing in a cafe in Cairo. It was 2013, and Egypt was in a crisis. After mass protests in Cairo's Tahrir Square, General of the Egyptian Armed Forces Abdel Fattah el-Sisi removed President Mohamed Morsi and suspended the constitution. A crackdown followed, with a sweeping campaign of arrests and shootings. It was a massacre. Ahmed remembers today. It was the worst of the worst. People were killed on the streets in front of cameras, and we could do nothing. Ahmed was an activist. He wished there was an Egyptian Commission for Human Rights. As the backgammon game progressed, the idea took shape. Lotfi was about to finish working for Amnesty International, where he was a researcher. He had the skills to study whether such an organization could really be created. But Ahmed struggled to get him on board. The two decided backgammon would settle the issue. If Ahmed won, Lotfi would do the study. And thanks to Ahmed for winning this backgammon game, and Ahmed Abdullah and Mohamed Lotfi since 2013 started the Egyptian Commission for Rights and Freedom. 24th of September 2020, Rafto Foundation announced that Rafto Prize 2020 is awarded to Egyptian Commission for Rights and Freedom for bravely resisting Egypt's state of fear. Mohamed, I will start with this from September, or 24th of September. Also, if I'm not mistaken, you were also nominated for Tulip Prize for Human Rights in Netherlands at the same day. How was it at the office there? How was it for more than 50 researchers and thousands of volunteers to win Rafto Prize?
We, of course, everybody was jubilant, and I can tell you that we myself and Ahmed knew that we were going to be awarded on this day the Rafto Prize, and we were very happy. And I can tell you from the eyes of my colleagues who didn't know about it, I only told them that there were some good news coming up this week without specifying. And when you are a lawyer or a researcher and you are just like buried in testimonies and trying to help out political prisoners to get medication in prison or hopefully get released, you don't get to be exposed to the recognition that the Rafto Prize brings. You don't get to interact much with the outside world, and you're on your own, and you feel you're on your own in your bubble. So suddenly, when you're a lawyer working for ECRF or a researcher or a campaigner, and suddenly you find this recognition, you feel like all those days where you felt alone, you are not alone, and that there were people observing this effort, appreciating it, and ready to recognize in front of everybody the importance and give credit.
Yeah, talking here about the international community, Mohammed, and personally, I feel Egypt is not covered enough in the media. especially since 2016, we're very busy, for example, news about Trump. We are like, when we focus in the Middle East, we focus in countries where there is a lot of blood, like Yemen, Libya, and Syria. What do you like to change? Is there anything that you would like to change from the international community that would help Egyptians in their daily life?
Oh, so many things. I mean, we are usually very happy at ECRF when we see the international press covering the work we do, or at least, putting efforts to show and shed light on human rights violations happening in Egypt. And the reason for this is not only because the media in Egypt is very censored and would not speak about what we put out in terms of information, but it's also because we want everybody to know abroad that the struggle is still on, that the images that people have seen across the world of millions saying freedom, bread, and social justice and dignity, that this fight is still on, that Egypt is not a lost case, and that the Egyptian people is still insisting on being equals of the rest of the world, living in a democracy, living with their constitutional rights respected. So I think the first thing we would love to see change in the minds of people abroad is to believe that Egyptians are just as worth as anybody else living in a democracy, that they are willing to live in a democracy just like anybody else, that they have constraints and difficulties, obstacles and threats, many risks that they face in voicing out these aspirations. But still, despite that, there are a few who are still standing their ground and believe that tomorrow can be better.
Jostein, as we see here, like the international solidarity is very significant for human rights defenders and people who fight for social justice. For you, as someone who is very interested in this and working daily for human rights around the world, especially, is there anything that you'd like Norway to take more responsibility of? Do you like something that you think like we are able to do in Norway more than what we are doing right now?
In terms of the situation in Egypt?
Egypt,
No, it's, well, first of all, thanks for the invitation, for being here, and hello, Mohamed.
Hi.
And thanks for the initiative. I think it's, well, and also just to say that I think what Mohamed is saying, about Rafto price, it is trying to say, you are not alone, that we are in solidarity with each other, that that people standing up for human rights anywhere are standing up for the human rights of all of us. And I think the Rafto Prize always tries to shed light on human rights violations and also on human rights defenders that are not getting enough attention. And I think that we've forgotten about many of the Arab countries and about Egypt after the Arab Spring. And this is to try to draw the attention of Norwegians, but also the Norwegian government and also the international community towards what's happening in Egypt. And certainly that's also something we challenged the Norwegian government to do.
Yeah, and maybe that's why we saw also 4 winners for Rafto in the last 10 years with Arab countries, Bahrain, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon.
Yes.
And Mohamed, here I would like to discuss a bit the methods that you use in your work, especially what was really fascinating, like ECRF released last year a series of 13 reports with a special focus. But what is really fascinating, like in countries where situation is going through a lot of ups and downs, people tend to forget about the most vulnerable groups in the community, LGBT, refugees. But in your reports, you focused so much on these groups, minorities, sexual minorities, refugees. How do you see maintaining the rights of the most vulnerable in the community is important for everyone in Egypt, for every Egyptians?
I feel that protecting the rights of minorities might be one area where big progress can be made. with a lot of effort. Minority rights is seen by the Egyptian government, and the government likes to present itself as protectors of the religious minorities and sexual minorities, etc. And the reality is completely different. However, it leaves us a space to basically bring up grievances of those minorities and expect the government to want to say, yes, more efforts needs to be done there. So, for example, if we look at the question of refugees, you mentioned also, last year and this year we published 2 or 3 reports on refugees. One of them had to do with family reunification of Syrian and asylum seekers and refugees in Egypt. And the report basically speaks about how complicated, how so much paperwork and problems and bureaucracy in getting a family reunification, and also it's something that's quite expensive. And to our good surprise, after the launch of the report, maybe a couple of months later, there were some directives from the government to facilitate the family reunification for Syria. It's still complicated, but there were a few hurdles removed there. Same with tuition fees for refugees and from the Middle East. We did a report about it, and how basically students from refugee background had to pay much more than their peers, Egyptian peers in Egypt, and exceptions were made after the publication of this report. Most lately, we have been pushing for Uyghurs from China, from Turkestan, China, to have their asylum seeker cards in Egypt renewed. With Corona, the understaffing of UNHCR, etc. A lot of them had their cards expired, and there was a bit of campaigning and a bit of pressure. They finally got a meeting in a couple of days with UNHCR to renew their cards. Fingers crossed. These are the most vulnerable groups. On sexual minorities, we have done some work with transgenders, and most famously the case of Malak El-Kashif, who is a transgender woman who got arrested back in 2019. We campaigned a lot on her behalf, along with other transgenders, and we campaigned on her behalf until she was released. She was in the middle of the process of changing sex, and she managed to complete this process. And we raised the case on a strategic litigation case on her behalf, so that prisons in Egypt would have a space to keep a transgender person in case of arrest, because the problem with Malak is that she, on the ID card, she's male, while she identifies herself as female and was going through the process of changing sex, and so had to be detained in a male prison when she identified as a female. We haven't won that case. We are on the first instance court, and we are appealing now. Hopefully, the higher court would agree with our opinion that a transgender when arrested or detained should be separated or put with those they identify with in terms of gender.
But this method that you use usually is you make like a significant change in the law, as I understood. Like you change the law, and then that will, like the next times, next cases that will follow the same rule that you changed already.
Ultimately, this is the goal: is to resist those laws that are not in line with the Egyptian constitution. We highlight this all the time. However, getting a law change in Egypt for human rights is the most difficult part of the job. What we could do, and we do, is to resist new laws that are going to make things even worse. and that we are sometimes able to do, and many times we are unable to do. Our methodology is based on basically relieving as much as possible victims of human rights violations, most notably prisoners, and by providing them legal aid, helping out their families with information and what kind of legal assistance they can get and what can they do, but also by campaigning. And I think that's where we sort of brought something new in the work in Egypt, is to highlight cases with facts, like with enforced disappearances, and speak all the time of the disappeared. That keeps the story alive. And today, you ask anybody in Egypt, is enforced disappearance happening? A lot of people will tell you yes, and a minority will able to deny that phenomena, although the government is denying it.
And also the numbers are very high, like maybe 2,700, that the cases that you reported.
Yes, we managed to document 2,700 cases over 5 years, between August 2015 and August 2020. But I can tell you, these are the cases documented. The cases reported overall is more than 15,000. So we are only able, we have the capacity and to document maybe 15-20% of the reality.
Continuing here, talking about methods, especially that we have it here quite peacefully in Norway. But usually people who work in Rafto, the staff in Rafto, they see different cases from around the world, which is sometimes it's really difficult to witness. How do you prepare people mentally in Rafto for such work? How do you use any methods that would let them imagine the places they are choosing from?
In terms of when selecting a Rafto awardee, we have a prize committee that is working quite intensely for a long time, choosing among many well-deserving potential candidates, and that's also quite a thorough preparation process they are going through there in terms of choosing a Rafto laureate. When it comes to working with our laureates and working with human rights defenders, I think, of course, from our side, we are in a privileged position because we don't run the risks that many of our laureates and the defenders we work with are doing on a daily basis. But we do get pretty close to it, and of course, being that can be harsh, and it can be and you get emotionally involved, which you should be as well. But of course, I think we through the years we have developed methods of dealing with it, and working with people in that context. But you are affected by the stories you hear, by the work that our laureates are doing, like what Mohamed is talking about here, and I think we everyone at Rafto Foundation, both when we award the Rafto Prize, but also when we work with laureates afterwards, we do feel a lot of responsibility for the work we do, and also trying not to do any harm in the work we do.
Yeah, but in addition also to the prize, Rafto work with schools.
We are. So one thing is that we work supporting our laureates, and we also work with human rights defenders, women human rights defenders. We have quite a lot of work on that, and then we work with. We also have our education program on democracy and human rights, which is directed at schools and students here in Norway. So
yeah. Talking about working with laureates, how do you follow up with them? Do you think about having a network for human rights defenders? Because like in Bergen here, for example, I met a lot of great human rights defenders, like they live in exile right now. And I wish at one step, for example, in Syria, that we get to know these people so we learn from each other experience. But in countries, there is permanent lockdown. We don't see each other. We don't hear about each other's experiences. But do you think about building a kind of network?
Yeah, and we do both. We do have both the individual follow-up where we work with laureates, and that really depends on what the needs are. And we are just we're just starting that work with ECRF now, but it's really sort of depend on what laureates needs, and we would have an individual follow-up and work with our laureates for quite some time, and we never leave our laureates.
I heard Mohamed was talking about like Rafto as a family now.
But we also believe in creating networks of human rights defenders, and so we often talk about it as a Rafto family of laureates, but these laureates, they also become part of the same network, and where they can support each other, and we do gather them physically when we can and these days digitally. But that's also an important part of what we do is creating network both between laureates, but also between laureates and other human rights defenders. And
Mohamed here talking about networking, and especially that many Arab countries that need the likes of ECRF, the Egyptian Commission for Rights and Freedom, to provide legal aid to highlight the violations that in human rights. Do you think about doing something like this, collaborating with organizations, helping them to register such cases, Syria, neighboring countries?
Yes, I mean, it's a very difficult task, because most countries that absolutely need that kind of intervention are going through very bloody internal conflicts. So we have gathered with Syrian, for example, activists in Egypt, and who are in exile, studying in Egypt, and we helped them, hosted them in our offices to give them the trainings they needed. They had a plan, or their plan that was already 3-4 years ago, was to replicate the experience of ECRF back in Syria when things settled down. But I can tell you there were a lot of national security harassment to those Syrian asylum seekers in Egypt. And basically they disbanded. I mean, they faced so much threats that they could not continue to do what they intended to do, and some of them have actually left Egypt altogether because it was too dangerous for them to stay. Now a lot of Egyptians are also living in Tunisia, and Tunisia is perhaps a better launch pad for new organizations in countries of the region, because it's more stable, it's more open, and you could try, sort of the banding or grouping people coming from Arabic-speaking countries together, and then start from there. But the idea that there is a second breath, the idea that even under very hard repression you could sustain a human rights organization, I think that's a big hope, and it gives hope to many other peers in countries of the region that they could try, and that it might succeed. So I'm thinking Sudan, I'm thinking Algeria. Morocco is already rich with human rights organizations, but the newcomers, I would say, would be Sudan and Algeria, indeed.
Talking about refugees here, Mohamed, how do you work with refugees, especially that in Egypt probably you have millions of refugees and only a few 100,000 who are registered?
Yes.
How do you work with this issue?
So mainly what we have been doing is to listen to them. So refugees, especially Syrians, we have done a lot of work with them. And second, the Uyghurs, a little bit with Sudanese as well, is to listen to them. Basically try to gather a group of them and tell them, hey, what do you want? And think together. We host you, you come, we offer the space for you guys to meet up and speak together. and then we help you even did some strategic planning with Syrian refugees to see where they want to go, what are their priorities, and then we help them where they need help. And I'm a strong believer of the need for human rights defenders to be backing those stakeholders. I mean, the whole idea of ECRF is to help people become human rights defenders, to defend their own rights. There is no point in us going around and running around trying to defend the rights of people if people are not willing to be at the forefront. It makes us it's less efficient, but it also makes us vulnerable, and it doesn't necessarily help much the beneficiaries or the stakeholders. And agency is a very important factor for success and for sustainability. But the reality is, we live in Egypt. There are security threats, and even when you get agency, you get participation, you help as much as you can. Things don't necessarily turn perfectly as you want in the end, but we need to keep trying until we reach what we want to reach. Yeah.
And how was it during Corona, after the pandemic since March?
With Corona is even more difficult because a lot of refugees have lost their jobs. Egyptians too, but even more so for refugees and asylum seekers in Egypt. The UNHCR hasn't been able to help as quick and as much asylum seekers and refugees in Egypt, financially even. And that was we put out a report about the effects of coronavirus on the economically and socially on refugees. And I can tell you, some testimonies are really heartbreaking. I mean, it's a matter of finding enough food to put on the table. So a lot of refugees has gone to get poorer and poorer. The UNHCR, given safety and safety measures that they take, they are not able to provide the services as quick and as much as before. And I mean, okay, it's a valid excuse, but for how long? These are the vulnerable The vulnerable groups are the ones who pay the price in these crisis situation, and it was true for refugees and migrants.
Change of directions a little bit here. The preening of hypermasculinity that we see recently in Egypt is like a bit similar to some countries like in Russia, where like patriarchy and reserving its moral crusades for queer and women in Egypt. How do you see this shift in gender discourses there in Egypt?
Yes, well, we have seen recently in the past year and this year how the judiciary has gone on a witch hunt after young teenagers who do TikTok talk and TikTok dances. And those girls, 9 in total, the most famous ones on TikTok in Egypt, were arrested and faced trial over undermining family values. And that was very surprising because, had we been living under an Islamist government, everybody would be going around saying, you see, that's what we have been warning about, is an Islamist government would just do that, try to tie women to traditional values and not let them emancipate, etc. But what we see is really hypocrisy from the government in Egypt, is pretending that they are fighting Islamism, political Islam, when they are just doing exactly what you would expect a government from political Islam background to do. So it's we are getting the worst of the machist, very conservative values of a military government. Added to that, the arguments around religion and family values, etc. So we are not winning on any of the two fronts. My wife was arrested back in 2018 for putting out a video where she was complaining about sexual harassment. She got sexually harassed in an hour in Egypt, and population interfered to basically let the harasser go. She went back home, she opened her Facebook, and she did an online video basically swearing at everybody. She was very angry. And she was arrested later on and put on trial. She received 2 years prison. And the judge, and I was there at the session, the judge was telling her, hey, Amal, we know that sexual harassment is happening in the street, but what we do is usually the girl goes home and stays in her room and screams or cries. She doesn't do a video like your one you did. And that was, for him, it was understandable that harassment is happening, but he could not accept the fact that a woman would go out with her face and speak out or say her anger about sexual harassment. That was unacceptable, and it has to do also with the idea that women don't speak, women don't have a voice on their own. That's and it's a catastrophe.
Also, I hear like people who work in the Egyptian Commission saying that when women are going to the police to say about the case of harassment, so then they threaten them that maybe they will report a case against you of maybe humiliating them or beating them, or that makes it very difficult for women actually to register these cases.
Yeah, it's true, and it's often when you go and complain to the police and want to file a police report to accuse somebody of something, an assault, an attack, a harassment, all the other person can do to defend themselves is to file back another police report accusing you, even fakely, without any proof, without any witnesses, fakely of the same, or having attacked him, assaulted him, or whatever, and then both will be put in a cell, and both will have to go through detention and a trial, perhaps even. So in the end, the victimized person will feel dissuaded from filing a police report, or will withdraw the police report if they have already done it.
I see like people writing about they can't hear us. I hope you hear us better right now. And feel free also to write your questions so we can open for the audience last 10 minutes. And Jostein, here we're talking about gender equality, and especially in Western Europe, we're doing better than maybe other countries, but other continents. But I see like there is only one Rafto winner who is from Western Europe. It was 1996, I guess. It was Palermo on Uno. Is that a kind of utopia in Western Europe, that we achieved everything when it comes to human rights? Or
no, not at all. And in our democracy and human rights education, we focus a lot on challenges, human rights challenges here and in Norway and the things that we are facing here. So not at all a utopia. I think also that Rafto Prize last year to Ruba Muaisen from Lebanon, while she is working for refugees from Syria, it is also a prize that is challenging European refugee policies and EU and Norwegian refugee policies. The Rafto Prize to the civil ombudsman, human rights ombudsman in Poland, Adam Bodnar, the year before, is also, while it's a country in Central Europe, Poland, it is also goes at the heart of how the some of the human rights challenges and democracy challenges we see in the midst of the EU. It's an EU country, so we do have we do have prizes that are focusing on challenges here as well. So and there's not really there's no nothing in principle that goes against having a laureate from Western Europe either. But what we would often find is that the Rafto Prize would often recognize not only laureate doing important human rights work and addressing an important human rights cause, but also that a laureate is facing pressure for doing that work, is in some way is having is running a risk, and that the government is either actively persecuting a human rights defender, or is failing to protect human rights defender. And that was the case with Palermo and Uno, who's working against the fighting the mafia in Italy.
Yeah.
But you would also often have that element as well to have the Rafto to be in a Rafto awardee.
Yeah. Also, like choosing the Rafto winner, like how do you know that you are at the right side of a conflict, especially when countries where there is a lot of sub conflicts, that it's even difficult for people from this country to know the dynamics.
And that can be very difficult. Luckily, we do have a. I'm not the one doing it either. We have a prize committee with academics and researchers, and they work also independently of the Rafto administration. But it would be those kind of things they would also be very careful to look into when they are doing their research. And trying to understand the context in which the award is given. So it will be those kind of questions are important to look into. So yeah.
Mohamed, back to the vibe in 2011. How would you describe the feeling of Arab Spring? What did it mean for you as a person and for Egyptians?
It means a lot. I mean, it's a defining moment in the history of the countries in the region. Every country in the world or every nation has a defining moment, has a mythical beginning. Okay, and that well could have been and may be in the future the mythical moment of birth of a new Egypt or a new Syria or a new Tunisia. It's a moment. It's a defining moment because there is a before and after. A defining moment because it's a moment when everybody, most people, sort of agreed that a page needs to be turned and the new page needs to be opened with some slogans that need to be at the heart of that new page or that new era. And I'm still until now I hear sort of the chants in my ears of freedom, of social justice, of human dignity. It's a moment when the Egyptian people have claimed to be part or to become recognized as part of the human family. And it was very important that this moment succeeds because you can with the rest of the planet and the rest of the nations around when you are recognized as worth, catching up. And this was a moment of anger from the Egyptian population to say, hey, we exist. We are here. And we will be well treated as sisters, like a woman or like a man or a Norwegian woman is treated with dignity and respect in their country. So this is a dream, okay, that Egypt becomes a democracy, that human rights are valued and respected. Not 90%, 100%. I'm not saying that. It's a big effort and it takes a lot of time. Even as you mentioned in Europe, it's a battle. It's an everyday battle. And it's thanks to people like you as journalists or as foundation, Rafto, and every day there are people who try to advance human rights everywhere, and there is resistance by others. Others also sometimes gain ground, but then there are enough people there to push back and to preserve those rights. And this fight is we're given up, and hopefully we won't give up, and we will gather even more strength and even more public and supporters, so that we are strong enough to make governments abide by constitutional rights. And we have a moment in our memory, fresh, and that's 2011, that's the uprising, that's the Tahrir Square, that remains the symbol or that myth that will live for decades and perhaps to come. Whatever the government does to tarnish that image, to falsify history, and to put lies in the minds of the new generation and the older generation about a plot from the West, about a plot from Hamas, about a plot from Iran, and probably everybody, all enemies have to create the Arab Spring. And it's so convenient for the government to describe it that way. It's not logical, it's completely false. But it just shows the strength of that mythical moment, a defining moment in the Egyptian, and it's something that we could build on in the future for a new era.
Yeah, when you said I still hear the chants, I start hearing the chants actually myself. Well, but I want to ask, like, my question is why Egypt is not, like, like transition in Tunisia was very smooth in a way. Why Egypt is not Tunisia, and why Egypt is not Syria?
It's a difficult question. It's a very difficult question. I really don't know. I mean, a lot of explanations are put forward for that. I don't know, to be frank with you. I mean, I guess every country has its own path to, or every people has its own path to emancipation, and the more peoples get emancipated and obtain their rights, the easier it makes it for those their neighbors. So Tunisia has is leading, one can say, comparatively to others. If Egypt succeeds, that should make it easier for Syrians, and if Syrians succeed, that should make it easier for Egyptians, and vice versa. So it's only, it's natural that you see that the enemies of democracy, the enemies of rule of law, are willing to put a lot of efforts, a lot of money, and a lot of use all their networks to actually kill any embryonic experience of transition to democracy, because they know well that if those experiences grow up and succeed, their turn will come next, and don't want that.
Jostein, before we go to the audience and see if they have any questions, actually, it's a question and a wish. After COVID is over, will we see ECRF in Bergen?
Oh yeah, I really hope so. Of course, if Mohamed wants to come, but we do really look forward to welcome Mohamed, his colleagues, and ECRF to Bergen. And we are very sorry that we are not able to do it this year. It's always a special moment for us to welcome our laureates to Bergen. So, but this year we have to do with Mohamed on screen like this, and but we'll have the prize events next weekend. We're very much looking forward to that. We'll have speakers both being in Bergen and being online, and also we have the ECRF logo is up on all screens and places around in Bergen these days. So you are very much present, Mohamed.
Wow.
And we are looking forward to the events
Thank you.
next weekend, and to see you here physically when the pandemic allows, or when we can. So
yeah. Actually, you're very present here. Like,
looking forward.
ECRF is all over the city now.
Thank you very much. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, here we have a question. Since you guys mentioned the Arab Spring 2011, I have a question that goes so often in my mind. To what extent do you feel that we, who participated in the demonstrations and protests back then, have a realistic view of what happened and what we managed to do? How romantic is actually our view? Yeah. So the question is, how realistic is our view for what happened during the Arab Spring? The question is from Asham Alwani.
Yes, it is realistic. A lot of people have, expected it to get better, so things get better faster. I think this expectation is the one that's not realistic. It takes a long time for things to change, and a lot of effort, enormous effort. We underestimate all the time in our region, in the Middle East, how much sacrifices were made in Europe or in the US or in many other nations across the globe, in Latin America, until people have reached where they are today with generally accepted human rights and democracy. Some wars and genocides even, and so one has to understand that the aspiration of people are absolutely realistic. They can be done, but the price for that is much more than what people expected initially during the Arab Spring. And the fight continues. There is always a risk of deviation. We see in some European countries, we see also deviations from democracy, and there is always a pushback or a resistance from civil society, from syndicates, from professors, academics, independent journalists, human rights organizations, lawyers, etc., who try to defend the constitutional rights of everybody so that there is no deviation into authoritarian governments or fascist governments or extremist views. So don't lose hope. It took a long time for people in Europe to enjoy the rights and freedoms they are enjoying today. It's a battle that they continue to do every day. It's not nothing is given for granted, and so we have to keep in mind that it's a long struggle and a struggle worth spending our lives in.
Here is from Lisa. Have a lot of cases of similar human violations in Indonesia. Actually, I can't hear this. It's intriguing for me to do my thesis within this area. Yeah. From Alwani to thanks so much for the talk. I salute your work and your organization, Mohamed. My question is, how do you navigate the increasing security and the political crackdown in Egypt today?
Oh. It's a very difficult
question from Alwani.
Yes, it's very true. I mean, you are walking on a thread, really. So even in a talk like this one, I'm telling you what I think, okay? And I'm not saying anything that I don't think, okay? But I have to pick very carefully every word I tell you. And every example I give you, because I'm in Egypt. So chances are that maybe some people will see later on at least this video, and I don't want to jeopardize a long struggle, as I told you, because I want to spill my anger at an occasion like this one at the Egyptian government. I won't do that because it's not pragmatic. It's not the right thing to do, because we have to live long enough and free long enough out of prison for that moment when things get to change, and then we can openly say everything we think. So every word has to be counted. Every report I have to review it myself. To make sure that we won't just have to pay a price of repression, additional repression, with no obvious, gain in terms of progress for human rights or anything. So we're very careful. We take all our digital security practices very, very seriously. And I can tell you, sometimes our staff are scared. Yes, and I personally sometimes get scared. Often I get colleagues who come up with ideas who are brilliant ideas. And maybe sometimes I tell maybe I'm getting too old or something, so I'm too reserved or too scared. But then when I see them eager to do it, I can't tell them, hey, no, don't do it, because then I can't. I tell them, okay, let's do it, but let's do it this way, or at this timing, or a moment when the government would be expecting us to hire our voice. Okay. So it's about, perhaps I can choose the timing of the report, or the wording, or the statement, or that intervention. And so, for example, to give you an example on this one, so we knew that on the 24th of September there was the announcement of the Rafto Prize. Okay, but we also knew that there were calls for protest in Egypt on the 20th of September, and we expected that to happen. And so I thought that we're going, of course, to report on the protests, reports on the arrests that are going to happen, and we knew that this was going to happen. And so some of my colleagues were saying, like, be careful, Mohamed, it might backlash if we speak too much or too strongly about those protests and the arrest and all that. But I knew already that 4 days after the protest, there'll be an announcement of the Rafto Prize. So I was feeling safe to actually punch strongly on the government, because I knew by the time they would want to punch at us, there will be this announcement and we'll be protected for a little while. So it's a day-to-day, it's a chess game. We're playing a chess game all the time, basically.
Yeah. A question from Aya Majdi is, in your opinion, why did Egyptian demonstration fall? Is there any way out to restore our rights and freedom back?
We must be ready for, there are many reasons why there were protests back in 2011 that led to the fall of Mubarak. And one of them is the regional context. The regional context was, and the international context was favorable for such a change. You had an administration in the US that, at the time, Obama, that came to Cairo altogether and made a speech in the Cairo University speaking about democracy and the importance of human rights. Tunisia was happening, and other countries were also happening. If you remember well, just before that, in the Western Sahara, for example, there was a camp by the Sahrawis protesting as well. There were that time, something was brewing, something was there in the air. Iran, just before, in 2009, there were a huge protest, and a lot of people in the Middle East were watching Iran's experience and wishing that perhaps they can do the same. So things were going in that direction, and there was a momentum building up. Today, the regional and the international context is not favorable, I can tell you. And hopefully that changes soon, and give us the depth, the strategic depth of international support and pressure for respect for human rights and transition to democracy in the region.
Yeah. There is a question, maybe this is the last question from Sabine. How is the compulsory voting law in Egypt affected your work?
Compulsory what?
Voting law in Egypt affected your work?
So, I mean, the compulsory voting has not affected our work. It's not elections or monitoring of elections in Egypt requires you to be registered as a non-governmental organization, and it requires you to get a permit from the High Elections Committee to give you the cards to allow you to observe or monitor elections. And so we are not a registered NGO in Egypt. We have been rejected from that, and we operate as a law firm and as a company. And so we cannot monitor elections. I don't know if that answers the question. I'm not sure. Yeah.
With this question, actually, we will thank you, Mohamed, for joining us today, and we hope to see you in Bergen after COVID is over. And
thank you.
Follow up with Rafto. There is the conference is on the 7th of November, and
so the Rafto conference is on the 7th of November, and the Rafto Prize ceremony will be on the 8th of November. And well, we are very sad not to be able to have as many people in the theater and the university hall as we normally have, and as we will not be able to have Mohamed with us there physically. It will be able to, we will be reaching out more than we ever have been, because we have, it will be streamed, it will be online, and hopefully people both in Egypt and in Norway and around the world can follow. So we are very much looking forward to it, and hope everyone watching here will join us next weekend.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mohamed, for joining us, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much,
Jostein. And thanks for the audience, and special thanks for Bergen Global for facilitating this event again on a Saturday. Thank you so much.